it's not that like it's like totally off limits to criticize, you know, decisions by union leadership. I think sometimes, you know, that's legitimate. You know, that's you know, I mean, you know, labor leaders certainly do things sometimes that merit criticisms, but I think that the particular way that it's done here, I've got to say, I mean, is kind of a you know, is kind of a model of how not to do it, right? Because it's not that you have to, it's not that you always have to say that they got it right, but I think that there's like a certain, I don't know, spirit of humility that should go into this, and in particular in this case, because like, look, I don't know, I guess I never want to get so cynical that I can't get excited about something like this, because you know, Sean Fain is somebody who talks in a way that I'm not used to hearing major union leaders talk. I think he's like a really effective and even inspiring, you know, communicator for, you know, for a kind of, you know, for a kind of fight for, you know, for a more equal society. You know, I think he's somebody who can like, you know, draw on a certain kind of Christian radicalism in a way that's like, I think there's a long and very positive tradition of, in the United States. It's also maybe worth remembering here that this is a guy who, you know, I know it was almost the World Socialist website, dude, but like Sean Fain was directly elected by the UAW membership. They didn't used to do that. So he did that. And, you know, and he and, you know, team around him, and, you know, like these people have been able to, you know, really get like a sort of overwhelming consensus within the union behind their strategy. I mean, again, we said this in the main show, but just to reiterate, the strike authorization vote was 97%. That's you know, this is something like, I don't know. I mean, I think you should maybe pause to consider the possibility that these people know what they're doing.
And this idea that some of the reform leaders have come up with these days is, you know, this one day longer, one day stronger. That is not the way to go. That is not what's going to hurt the bosses in the way that it's absolutely necessary to hurt them in order to force them to concede to the demand. So in other words, the best strikes are the ones that are strong and short, not long and weak, you know. And I would say, you know, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, as I was saying earlier, but no doubt both some of the big business unionists in the AFL-CIO and in the Democratic Party leadership have been pushing back against any idea of a strong strike. In other words, it's possible that this is what Fain and his fellow leaders, they think that this is the compromise situation that they've come up with, where they go on strike, but not quite, not angering the Biden administration too much, you know, that sort of thing. And already in the last few hours, we have heard that the White House administration is getting directly involved. You know, Biden has sent his 2 key labor representatives to Michigan. And so what's needed first and foremost right now is we need the rank and file in UAW to themselves get organized and not accept this so-called stand-up strike. We need them to get organized to pressure for an all-out strike and to build the widest support between within the union rank and file at every facility. I think that they can get that support. There is that support. We saw that, you know, from the response of the workers to the announcement from Sean Fain. And of course, you know, there will be huge community support as well. And if necessary, they probably will have to prepare the ground for wildcat strikes.
So I think there's like a couple things. Jake, I'm just curious if you have this by chance, but do you know when this is from?
No, and I'm embarrassed. Ben asked me to search for it. I'm embarrassed to say that this is a tweet from Post Left Watch, which is not my favorite account necessarily. Yeah. I think Ben's been on Post Left Watch. You seem to still be on the left.
I've been on Post Left Watch many times, which is fucking hilarious, because it's like
whiny little tattletales. I hate that whole thing.
Yeah, totally.
but
Like,
yeah,
but it's also just so funny that like the premise of the account, like the name of the account is Post Left Watch. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a member of the DSA. What the fuck are you talking about? How am I post left?
it's left. Yeah, it's leftists that we're mad at. Which I guess this is also. She's not being like not leftist. She's just
No,
maybe
exactly.
being.
Like,
She's
yeah,
back being ultra.
that's
You know?
not post left. That's just a leftist who's saying something you disagree with.
Yeah.
Something, by the way, I disagree with, but like whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it's we're gonna get to the, that's kind of the other side of the coin of the people we're talking about right now, who's like the post left watch kind of idiots. But yeah, like,
sorry, I don't have the. I didn't want to have to shout them out, but yeah, that's finding it in a pinch. That's where I found it.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, like it just. So the strategy. Well, actually, does one of you guys want to kind of speak to this a little bit, like, because I mean the sort of critique that Kshama is making in that clip and in the other one that I think we all saw earlier that was going around is well, what are they doing? Because they're only having some of the workers go out and strike. Right now that like a lot of them aren't on strike yet, and really they should all go on strike because that's going to be the thing that's going to be most effective. Which I think has some initial plausibility to it, but I think if you kind of think a little bit more about the strategy, is I do think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and there's some reason to think that what they're doing makes sense. So what if you guys want to speak to that?
Well, let's just start with this really fast because I think it's really important that we get our facts straight here. Because she's sort of outlining some of those arguments there in that clip. The one that got a lot of pushback that we covered on our show that a lot of other people pushed back was one that came out a few days after the strike was called. And in that video, and again, like I try to do these in a more comradely way because again, too, I think these are political and theoretical disagreements versus some of the other people who I just think are clueless and dangerous and bad. Now, this is what is frustrating to me about this, and we can get into some of the tactical things, but like, let's just get the history right really fast, because what this boils down to is this idea that escalation as a tactic doesn't work, which is ludicrous, in fact, because if you look at not just union organizing, but any kind of political organizing, like escalation is always going to be a tactic. Right? Because that's how you get confidence, strength, and the ability to mobilize is through escalation. And look, I mean, I guess it is really terrible that the stand-up strike isn't doing what they did with the sit-down strike when everybody went on strike immediately. Oh, wait. No, the sit-down strike started at one facility and people sit down at work, struck the facilities, and then other facilities joined. By the way, not the next day, over the course of weeks, right? So like, look, let's just get the facts straight about what this is. If you want to hold that up and say like, hey, they're breaking from this model and are doing that, and are not doing this, you should at least get this information right, because this is out there for you. So that's the first aspect that I wanted to get clear, because again, this is a historical point to make, right? If you're not, if you want to say, hey, this was a good model, the one that they did before, and then you get that wrong, as that's Ben, you're the theory, the logic guy, right? I mean, that's a bad premise, right? If you're saying like, look at this historical example. Oh wait, I don't understand the historical example that was underpinning my whole thing. Well, maybe you should take some time to revisit it. Now, anyways, history is boring, book reading, whatever. Let's look at what's happening right now. What has happened since the first days of the stand-up strike? I think it would be very fair to make some of these criticisms if like, they shut down one parts distribution center. And by the way, all of those things were hitting the profits of the bosses, not just in shutting down those facilities, but by using some of the tactics that they were using, like misdirection, misinformation. I'm sure people have heard the stories about, certain facilities thinking that they were going to be shut down. They moved goods out of them to find out that, actually the one that they moved them to is the one that's getting shut down. That costs the bosses money. So anyways, so like if the argument was like, they just did a couple things and then they're started back down, it's like, well, what has happened every week since the stand-up strike? was announced. Have the strikes been getting bigger, or have they been getting smaller?
Right.
Newsflash, folks, they're getting bigger. And one of the arguments that Kshama made and a lot of other people made is like, oh, well, they're not going at Ford. Well, the reason they weren't going at Ford is because of the fundamental idea of the stand-up strike, is that we're going to use this as a leverage tactic in our negotiations. Because remember, again, like the end result of this is to get a strong contract for these workers. And you should use the economic warfare to get that. But the contract is what the end goal is here. And Ford was playing ball, and they accepted significant concessions in those first weeks of bargaining after the strike was called. But guess what? Ford stopped playing ball. They started threatening things like shutting down a battery plant. So what did Sean Fain and the UAW do? So, well, now we're going to hit Ford as well. So the point is that there's a button that you can press to escalate the strike. There are people who know better when it comes to tactics and strategy than I. But I just think from the ground, sorry, from where it looks like for me, and from a lot of people who I'm talking to who are in the union movement or in this fight, everything seems to be pointing in the direction we're seeing it in the streets and in the picket lines, that these things are escalating. And just like one just last thing I'll say, I have way more, but I don't want to talk too long. But I just want to say that one of the things that's so frustrating to me about this argument, Ben, and again, using a little logic here, you could maybe fill in the terms for me, but effectively what we're talking about is one tactic over another. And what is happening here is there's a substitution of one of these tactics being the more, quote, radical option, and one of them being the more conservative one. And I think that that's absurd. Maybe to use a revolutionary example, right? It would be like saying like guerrilla warfare is more radical than like a war of position. Right. You know what I mean? No, that's absurd. I think everyone would recognize that that's absurd. Those are different tactics that are dependent on the different circumstances and situations that you find yourself in conflict, like armed conflict. And neither of them is like the more communist or the more radical or the more revolutionary one. And if you just want to be saying the most revolutionary thing, what you should be saying is just come out from the get-go and say, I think that the workers should take over the plants, kick out the bosses, and start producing vehicles themselves, right? Why like stop halfway with this kind of thing? If basically what you're saying is like, oh, there's actually a more radical thing that we could be doing than what you're doing. Go all the way and make the socialist argument as to what you would want. But everyone knows that that'd be absurd because we don't have that capacity or capability in the movement right now. So what you're doing is like you're having a tactical disagreement with leadership of a union who are fighting for their lives right now. You don't understand the history here that you're basing it on. You're not revisiting after a few weeks into the strike now either, as to whether or not this has been a letdown or anything like that. I think that it's a really bad argument, and frankly, sometimes it's good to have a little humility to say like, hey, we went in here, thought that this was a back down. Look, I will say this, like the very first moment that I saw that it wasn't going to be a full walkout, I had the moment like, oh man, is this a back down? And I talked to people, I looked at what's happening. It's like, oh wait, no, this actually, I see the tactics, I see the idea behind it. I think that this is I understand the logic of the strategy. And there's, unfortunately, we're not seeing that kind of reflection from people making the arguments like Kshama is right now.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, this is, look, they're preserving the strike fund and applying escalating pressure, applying it, as you said, tactically. So, if one of the companies is making more concessions, have the like next escalation be at the other companies. I don't know if it's, ultimately proof's in the pudding, right? I mean, we'll see, but like, that makes a certain amount of sense to me. And like, it is pretty standard. I mean, it's like a little bit weird. I mean, it's like even like literal military escalation, like, it's like, oh man, it's weird right now that neither Russia nor Ukraine is listening to the military wisdom of General Sawant here and having like doing like a full mobilization of the entire population and throwing everything on the front lines right now, right? Why not, right? And it just sort of saying a priori that's the tactic that you should do doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I cut you off, Jake. What are you going to say?
What was I gonna say? Well, one thing I was thinking that, like, real quick to your last point, I'm not sure if this is what they're doing, but part of like labor organizing theory, or just maybe organizing theory in general, there's something called a structure test, where you do a smaller part to see, make sure, like uh, let's say you do a smaller action to make sure you're ready for the larger action. So, also escalating tactics. Now, to be fair, I did learn about organizing from some AFL-CIO training, so maybe I'm just part of the bourgeois,
labor aristocracy.
Yeah, and I did a program at CUNY, so I'm sure they're in the pocket of big something. But yeah, escalation is literally part of the textbook part of how to run an organizing campaign. So yeah, for one reason is that it works better, like maybe to get a better contract, but also to get buy-in from your membership too. That could be a way to build up, like you said. And I think, to the counterfactual to your point, David, is really key, which is, if you're like, I think they're backing out, I think they're being weak. Well, you get to then see, okay, like, that was my hypothesis. Let's see what happens in the next few weeks. And if they start, striking more locations, then you could say that wasn't the case. Maybe I still could have been right that I was, like that it wasn't the best tactic, right? That's very difficult to see, but to say, but you, like you said, it should probably be seen as a difference in tactic versus like radicalism. And I think the last thing I would want to say on it is, like, if like to what you were saying, Ben, like, first of all, this is a like you said, 97% strike authorization, which he recognized that, that there is buy-in for membership. But also, Sean Fain came in, it was a reform caucus, right? And that and that it was a democratic effort to take back
decades,
right, to take back the union from more entrenched conservative people who are more business unionists. And he is part of that, part of a reform caucus anyway, and you have huge buy-in from the membership. So maybe it won't work out, you know what I mean? But if you're part of the left, you kind of have to be part of and interested in the fights that are happening. And I know that where you decide to draw the line at perfect,
sure,
it varies from person to person. But I think it's pretty wild to not at least say, all right, let's see what, like, I haven't been following this as close as I think you have, especially David. Like, so I don't know, I don't feel ready to say which tactic is better, but I just think, like, cautiously hopeful as opposed to just shitting on it immediately is a very weird. And it also, if you're the type of person, going more to RBN, or the type of group that is always shitting on things, and then, oh, what do you know, you're also criticizing this, you know what I mean? Like, and
well, it's because for them it's all conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah,
like, anything that seems exciting is actually some kind of dirty trick, to bamboozle you, right? It's like, at a certain point, it's just copy and paste.
Well, if I worked for, like, the government, the CIA, or the FBI, and I was trying to create a splinter group to make the left feel demobilized, I would maybe, that's my conspiracy. I don't know. I'm just asking questions. Would that not be the perfect vehicle, right, to make leftists feel that anything that actually could build power and build solidarity is actually some kind of fucking conspiracy plot? Would that not be the perfect type of leftist that you want to see? I don't know. I mean, I'm kidding, but still, it's like, if I had to, if I designed in a lab, if I had to design in a lab the most demobilizing bullshit, that's what I would design.
And I'll just say this, like, there are tactical things that are, like, real questions. And, like, I also think that socialists, I think that there is starting to become, I mean, it's one of those things, it's complicated, so it's hard to say, like, one way or the other. But, like, I do think that socialists should be able to be confident in being able to criticize the union movement. The union movement in this country is weak for a reason. A lot of that is the structural power of capital, but a lot of it is certainly conservatism in the union. There has been this kind of tendency where you, like, see these folks and people are like, oh, well, this is what happens when you, like, criticize union strategy, right? You're doing something bad, right? And it's like, well, that stuff is bad. But like Sam Gindin, for example, somebody whose work I respect a lot, had a really great piece of Jacobin looking at the Teamsters potential strike and that contract process. It was very critical. It was some real look in the mirror criticism. So I think one, don't drop that. But the other thing is with the UAW in particular, is that, like, even if what we're saying is that what we prefer is a full-on walkout, I really don't think that people who are making these arguments are very familiar with what's been happening in the UAW right now. Sean Fain wins this election, this historic election, incredible. But what, by a few hundred votes?
Right.
A very new process. They're building out and sort of trying to build up that they have support in the sense of like rank and file voters or people are voting for them. But this democratization movement that we're seeing within the union is something that is new, and like building those connections and capacity is happening right now. And they're having to do it while they're taking on the big three. The reason I really came around on this strike is that like I do think that there is a potential of some parts of the country, some parts of the union, maybe not being 100% in and committed, right? Certainly this is yeah, we support the strike, but like if this drags out for 4 or 5 months and people are out on strike, I mean that's when things get really tough. And you have to understand that like there are parts of the UAW, particularly some of the former leadership and people who might lead some of these locals who might not be as loyal to like the Fain strategy. So what does this strike do? It allows you to hit places where you have strong bases,
right?
And then it allows you to build the confidence and enthusiasm in maybe those other ones that you think are more on the line, which is the opposite of like which could have been a disastrous strategy. Like if they called it a full-on strike and then you saw some people maybe break or maybe falter or something like that. And at the end of the day, this is why the tactics conversation, picking one tactic as the more radical one than the other, is just absurd. To not use a war metaphor and use another one, it's like in football, right? If you're coaching a team and you don't have like a big, powerful running back who's like just a short yardage like monster, right? Well, it's not the most radical thing to start running up the gut, right, on 3rd and 2. It might be time to throw a screen pass or go around the outside and use your speed, like use your strength. Like there is no universal kind of like this is the right tactic, right? There's like in the technical sense, it's like, yeah, that's what you want. You want to have a strong running back who can do this kind of thing, but maybe you don't have it. And then you have to figure out how to do something similar. And this is what I'm seeing with the stand-up strike. It's like, how do we build something that can win? How do we build something that can build up the militancy within the union that is like growing, but it's certainly not where, we would want it to be going into this fight. And I don't know, if you're not wrestling and thinking about these kind of things, I just don't think you're thinking deeply about these things, frankly. And you're like a guy turning on, the Sunday night football game, being like, well, why are they running up the gut? So because the running back's injured, right? They don't have a good player to do that. You know what I'm trying to say? It's just like it infuriates me so much, the style of argument.
Yeah. It's like the guy would call into like a local sports talk radio show. Like, well, what I would have done. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, or like if you're a fan of the fucking Jets and you see that the Jets have a, they have a great new coach or whatever, and you're like, well, look, I hope they win, like it's like that would be more healthy than just watching for like 2 minutes and being like, why didn't they? Most of us have probably like sat in the room with a family member who's trying to like call the plays for a team.
Yeah. Well, that's me most of the time. That's football. I'm allowed to do that in football.
Why didn't Steph Curry just shoot a 3 every time down the?
That's what I would have done. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.